I am studying the Apollo program because I want to understand how NASA grew from the Apollo missions in order to find out what it takes to develop a rocket and launch missions to another astral body such as Mars. The Apollo missions were missions that lasted from 1967 to 1972 and sent humans to the moon. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy stood before Congress.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
This presentation to Congress led to NASA getting a much higher budget and also an intense timeline to get a man to the moon. The Apollo mission was first announced by the Eisenhower administration as a follow-up to the Mercury program. The initial goal of the Apollo program was to be a three-person missions following up the one-person Mercury missions. It was intended to launch a larger capsule into Earth orbit, deliver people to a potential space station, and maybe, potentially, have men go to the moon. At the time, NASA did not have the funding, facilities, or designs to even think about feasibly landing a man on the moon. But everything changed when Kennedy made a speech to Congress. This led to NASA getting the funding it needed. At the time of Kennedy's speech, only one American had even gotten into space. No one had even gone into orbit. NASA needed one thing to accomplish their goal: a rocket. On their Mercury missions before, used converted ballistic missiles. These missiles could barely launch one man into a low Earth orbit. The Apollo mission decided to use two rockets. One rocket would resemble the old, tested, and orbit-possible rockets of earlier missions, for assurance. The other rocket would be the big one, able to launch the capsule into space and then onto the moon. The biggest problem was that to develop this huge, brand-new rocket in only about 6 years. Luckily, America had a secret weapon: Dr. Wernher von Braun. An ex-Nazi rocket engineer, he came to the U.S. after World War II, became a pioneer in the rocket industry. Von Braun's team built the first rocket in a short time, launching for the first time in early 1964. Known as the Saturn-1B, it was a two-stage rocket that flew many unmanned tests and one manned Apollo mission. In October 1968, it did its first and only manned mission to space. Earlier, in 1966, the larger second rocket was built, Saturn V. The Saturn V was a three-stage rocket, the biggest rocket built as of today. In the first stage, it contained 5 of the most powerful engines ever made. The second stage contained fuel and a few small engines. The third stage contained the crew and a lunar lander. Saturn V lifted off for humans for the first time in December 1968. With the rockets built and tested, it was time for the manned flights of the Apollo missions. The first mission was Apollo 1 in early 1967. Its launch did not go to plan. During a mission practice test, a month before the actual launch, a fire started in the capsule with 3 astronauts in it. The door to the capsule was hard to open, and the environment was pure oxygen. Smoke inhalation quickly killed the 3 crew members. The disaster and loss of the crew led to huge redesigns of the capsule. The capsule had a redesigned door, mixed air environment, and all flammable materials was removed and replaced for safety. This delayed the launch of the next manned mission for roughly 2 years. Apollo 7 launched in 1968, October. Apollo 7 and 8 were missions to test out hardware for the lunar missions. Apollo 7 tested the new capsule, and Apollo 8 tested the Saturn V rocket and a lunar module. Apollo 9 followed by going into lunar orbit and then returning. Apollo 10 was a full rehearsal of a moon landing. Flew to the moon and flew the lunar lander to less than 10 miles above the moon's surface. The lander had limited fuel to prevent the astronauts from actually landing. On July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 took off from Kennedy Space Center and landed on the moon, completing Kennedy's missions. As Neil Armstrong said,
"It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind."
after a few days on the moon, they arrived safely back to Earth, welcomed as heroes. Apollo 12 followed in Apollo 11's footsteps, having a safe lunar mission. Apollo 13 was a different story. Apollo 13 had a safe launch and was on its way to the moon when a loud bang was heard. One of the oxygen tanks blew up and damaged the electrical grid of the command module. The second oxygen tank leaked out pretty quickly. This loss of electricity and oxygen led to the command module being useless. The 3 crew paddled into the lunar lander, using it as a lifeboat. Electricity and water were limited, and the space was also cramped. Thankfully, there was plenty of oxygen for the men. The crew orbited the moon once and then safely landed back at Earth. It is truly a miracle that the crew lived. Later, Apollo 14 launched as a repeat of the Apollo 11-12 missions. Apollo 15 followed that. However, Apollo 15 sent a lunar rover to the moon and spent more time on the moon's surface. It did more experiments, traveled farther, and gathered more samples to bring to Earth. Apollo 16 and 17 followed suit as the longer missions, with 17 being the final mission in the Apollo program. The Apollo program was a revolutionary example of American engineering and patriotism. The push to beat the Soviet Union to be the first to the moon propelled the population to promote exploration, science, and winning a peaceful battle against communism. War and patriotism drove engineering, science, and innovation that got us to the moon. This drive is something we do not have today, leading us to take longer to design a feasible mission to Mars. Although we may not have this drive due to conflict and competition, I hope that we can increase the funding to our scientists and explorers, such as NASA, so we can finally and hopefully achieve our goals to get to Mars soon.